The ancient Greek philosophers had a problem. If truth is eternal and unchanging, but the world around us is always changing, how can we know what's true? Plato tried to solve this with one of the most famous theories in philosophy, the theory of forms. For Plato, truth is eternal. It doesn't change. What is true always has been true and always will be. There must be, he thought, objective truth, including moral truth. This means that certain things are true independently of our opinions, but how can we work out what is true and what isn't? One method is empiricism, the idea that we can attain truths through our experience of the world, through our senses. For Plato, empiricism is unconvincing. The ancient philosopher Heraclitus pointed out that the material world, the world all around us, is constantly changing. For Heraclitus, the world is like a flickering flame, dancing around. It never stays still, and just when you think you've grasped its shape, it suddenly changes. The implications of this for Plato were that if the material world is always changing, then therefore it cannot be the basis of true knowledge, and our senses cannot be trusted. Truth, Plato says, is timeless. It doesn't change. Truth cannot be true at one moment and not true the next. Sure, the senses can give us facts about the world as it is right now, but not ultimate truth. Not truths about reality as it actually is, or about what is pure, what is beautiful, what is good, and what is virtuous. So, if we can't get to the truth through our senses, what are we supposed to do? But this guy noticed something fascinating. Pythagoras, he loved numbers. He emphasised the point that 2 + 2 = 4 independently of our experience of the world. Pythagoras was a rationalist, not an empiricist. Where maths is concerned, truths can be learned simply by working it out in our minds, by using reason. And this is where the theory of forms comes in, because Plato applies this idea to other things as well. Take beauty. Here are some beautiful things. Natural beauty, a beautiful statue, a beautiful sound. These are completely different. Physically, they have nothing in common. I mean, one is invisible, and yet they all somehow possess this quality of beauty. But what is beauty? Where is the beauty in these things? This is Plato's magical response. There is such a thing as beauty itself. Think of Pythagoras and his numbers. You can't get me a number 4. You can only identify quantities of 4, like 4 apples, and yet 4 exists objectively in some way. Beauty itself is a bit like that. But it's much more than just a concept of our minds. For Plato, there are 2 worlds. There's the material world, which we experience through our senses. This is the sensible world, or the world of appearances. Everything here is, in a sense, an illusion because it is not true reality. The true reality is the realm of the forms. This is where we find beauty itself and all our friends. Plato called these ideal essences forms. All beautiful things that we experience in our day-to-day lives resemble or participate in the form of beauty. This realm with all its eternal and timeless forms is where genuine truth can be found, and so true knowledge can only be derived from the forms, not from the changing material objects of the sensible world. A beautiful statue might one day crumble and cease to be beautiful, but the form of beauty is always beautiful. This is why truth is found with forms and not with particular things. But hang on, if the forms are beyond your experience, how are you able to even recognise beauty in the first place? Well, good news! You've been to the realm of the forms before, you just don't remember it. You see, for Plato, we have a soul, and the soul doesn't just live on after you die. No, it was hanging around before you were even born in the realm of forms. Here, it was exposed to the form of beauty and other forms before coming tethered to your body. This is what allows us to identify beauty, or instances of justice and virtue, and even triangles. Knowledge is recollection. It's one of Plato's famous ideas. True knowledge, he says, can be unlocked by the philosopher who relies not on their senses, but uses reason and philosophy to contemplate the forms. Philosophy, simply put, for Plato, is trying to understand things as they really are. It's a fascinating theory, but it's not without its problems. I mean, are there forms for everything? A form for eyebrows, for mud and dirt, a form for rubbish? Because if there is a form for everything, the theory seems absurd. We end up with this heavenly realm of forms with the perfect, ideal essence of garbage. What does Plato say about this? Not much. He keeps it vague. At one point he suggests that forms for hair, mud and dirt are unnecessary because they are just as we see them to be. And he does once mention forms of bed and table, but the context is such that we can't really be sure whether or not he was serious. Ordinarily, Plato restricts his examples of forms to things like just, beautiful, good, largeness, health and strength, things like that. But if forms only apply to a limited number of concepts, the theory isn't as explanatory as it first seems. It doesn't, for instance, explain why we recognise all cats as cats if there isn't really a form of cat. And that's just the beginning of the problems. Plato's own student Aristotle disagreed with his master, suggesting that the theory of forms results in an infinite regress. This is called the third man argument. All large objects, say, are said to be large because they participate in the form of largeness. However, the form of largeness must itself also be large. But if a form is needed to explain what all large objects have in common, then another form would be needed to explain what both the particular large objects and the form of largeness have in common. And then we would need another form and another and another. And that's not all. Plato doesn't seem to understand relative terms. If I stick up my fingers like Socrates does in the Republic, I have a finger that is both small and large. Small compared to that one and large compared to that one. For Plato, that's a flat-out contradiction. Something cannot be both small and large at the same time. The theory of forms solves this. The sensible world appears contradictory, whereas the forms, like largeness and smallness, are fixed and pure. But Bertrand Russell points out that Plato, in 4th century BC Athens, seems to have simply not developed an understanding of relative terms. Something can be both smaller than a large thing and larger than a small thing without being a contradiction. And you might have looked at these pictures of beauty and thought, they're not beautiful at all. Instead of this, you prefer something like this. Do disagreements about beauty, both subjectively and culturally, suggest that there is no objective beauty, and that therefore the form of beauty explains nothing? Could this apply to other forms as well? Plato's theory of forms might seem a bit odd, a heavenly realm of eternal essences beyond our experience, but Plato is trying to solve a genuine philosophical problem. How can we ground objective truth in something concrete if the world is always changing? And that is a debate that still goes on today. If you enjoyed this one, like and share with your philosophy friends. Thank you for watching and see you next time.